P-L-A-I-D. It's in the name.
Welcome into the Helping Healing Humor podcast with Ben and Travis. Today is one of those situations where we have an unfortunate thing and topic to talk about, but we believe, obviously, the Lord has an answer and has given us some of those. So we'll have that discussion right after these messages. This episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast is brought to you by the 79th Faulkner Bible Lectureship, Sunday, October 22nd through Thursday, October 26th, on the campus of Faulkner University in Montgomery, Alabama. This year's theme is Reconnect. The Jenkins Institute's Better series will be a part of the program in 2023, along with sessions geared towards youth and family ministry. There will be daily chapel programs and evening keynotes to encourage and equip you in your walk with Christ. The mission of Faulkner University is to glorify God through education of the whole person, emphasizing integrity of character in a caring Christian environment where every individual matters every day. For more information, go to faulkner.edu or click the link in the description of this episode. I'm Travis Creasy. That's all-pro counselor with 3-Chord Counseling in Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Ben Hayes, how are you, man?
I'm doing great. I'm actually coming to you from our offices at 3-Chord Counseling. 3chordshoals.com is the website, but we're doing good. Just had a busy week and a busy day, but other than that, I'm good.
Well, I don't know about you, but it seems like we've tried to pack in like 2 weeks worth of life events in a 4-day week.
Yes.
I'm actually kind of looking forward to a 5-day week just because to get everything done. But I guess the last time I laid eyes on you, we were down at Bryant-Denny Stadium cheering on the Tide. As this release, we may be really happy. We might be really sad on the outcome with Texas. But it was a fun trip. It was cool getting to hang out with you and Destin. Probably brought you back memories. And like, man, it's way better having Destin at the age she is on this trip. But we had a blast. It was fun.
Your kids did really good. Like, I was super impressed at how well they handled just walking around the stadium and then being in the stadium for as long as we were. And I thought it was a really good day.
I was thoroughly wallered, if that's a word I can use, by the end of it. But yeah, I thought it went pretty well, Well, before we get into the topic, we'll just give a warning. We will be talking about some very adult subjects. Unfortunately, it's not something that just impacts adults. And so we'll be having conversation. This is September. It is Suicide Prevention Month. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. So if there are any little ears listening, you be the judge on whether or not they're old enough to listen to this episode. And of course, we'll put a little warning out there, and probably the title of it will give it away. But just to cover our bases and let everybody know who might be listening, it will be a little bit more of a heavier subject than maybe usually we talk about. But that is something we're going to talk about. I believe they've actually done a national hotline now and like shrunk the number. Is it 988? I think that's...
Yeah, I think that's right. You can text that or call that. And so for, teenagers, especially who are not usually prone to calling, but to texting more, it's a little bit more user friendly, I guess you'd say.
Yes.
So yeah, that's one of the things. And, when you give that disclaimer about, the age thing, I understand a lot of kids, it may not be a topic. We're not going to get into too much detail about anything, but it is the second leading cause of death among teenagers. So, it's kind of important to me to think our teenagers need to be talking about or need to be hearing about these topics because it's there, and it's very much an issue that teenagers are dealing with on a daily basis. Their friends, family members, but even, some of those thoughts themselves. One thing that I saw today that kind of surprised me was that, it being the second leading cause, I'm not exactly sure what it's behind, but it is more than all the natural causes of death combined among teenagers. And so it's a pretty significant thing that that they're dealing with. I mean, you and I run for St. Jude, we want to help kids that are struggling with cancer and other things. And this is one of those things that kids are struggling with that sometimes we might not talk about as much.
Yeah, and like I said, it's a touchy subject. I think that it's probably safe to say, as I think you mentioned, that teenagers are probably already dealing with some level of this. And so, like I said, it's kind of a judgment call, but it's also one of those things that probably needs to be talked about earlier than it was with us when we were teenagers. And so I think that's sometimes hard for me to judge, because we kind of go, well, however it was dealt with when I was growing up, it was dealt with pretty well. Obviously, I hadn't struggled with that maybe per se, and that can kind of give us the false feeling, sense of security that, well, we can talk about it when about the age that we got talked to, but in the age of information and the internet, that conversation, along with several others, is one that has to take place a little bit earlier, and sometimes in some cases a lot earlier than maybe we had that discussion.
Yeah, because I mean, things are just at kids' disposal so much sooner now. Like you said, with the internet, just with, I don't know how fast kids are growing up today. It's a way, there's things that they're concerned about at 8 and 10 years old that you and I weren't thinking about till we were 16 or 17. They know more about not just suicide, but sex and other things that we've discussed on here. I don't know that I knew what the word anxiety meant when I was a kid. I don't remember that. I don't remember. I mean, I remember being scared of storms and, things like that when I was a kid, but I don't think I ever heard anybody go, boy, he's got a lot of anxiety. It just wasn't a word we talked about. And it's good on some level that we're talking about these things and opening the door to talk about them. That's why we do this podcast. But at the same time, it means that a lot of our kids know these things a whole lot. They're hearing it at school, and they're hearing it online. They're hearing it on TV a whole lot sooner, I think, than we were.
Oh, I think for sure that is the case. And, once again, going back to, I often use the illustration of a socket in the wall. Like, do you bring their attention to it and say, hey, that's dangerous? Or do you just hope, I guess,
cover it up and hope nothing happens?
Yeah, and cover up, nothing happens. And so it's kind of always been that struggle. And I think now it's kind of, and why this podcast you mentioned exists, is we've kind of got to the point that it needs to be talked about. The communication there is more important, because when I was growing up, it was kind of like, don't talk about it. There's a lot of things, don't talk about it, but maybe you don't bring attention to it. Maybe it won't be a problem. Right. And like you said, we have way so much information now. We are very thankful for Challenge Youth Conference continued support of this podcast and their partnership in raising funds for St. Jude through the Staying Alive Dodgeball Tournament. The purpose of Challenge Youth Conference is to meet the needs of our church teenagers who are growing up in a society that is often indifferent to living a life for Christ. CYC's mission is to present a program utilizing solid and sound scriptural emphasis. Our vision is to maintain a positive program which empowers our teenagers with sound teaching that challenges and encourages them to live their lives for Christ. You can email info@cyconline.com or go to cyconline.com to learn more information. We hope to see you there. So, Ben, we're talking about when to communicate, when it's time to talk about these things. And, there are reasons, I think, sometimes, and we may have talked about this before, but there are reasons why people contemplate this outcome of which there really is no return. And, share some of those with us in your experience that people oftentimes get in a situation where they feel like this is the only option.
Yeah. You often hear it said that suicide is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. And a lot of people, there's only been a couple of people who've survived, like jumping off the Golden Gate Bridge, I think it was. I know there was at least one person who survived that and said the moment that he jumped, he regretted that he jumped. I wonder how many more of those who did that might have experienced that same emotion, but they didn't live to tell it. So, there's things like that where it's important for us to think about what's the reason that people are doing it. And if we can figure out the reason, we might figure out some prevention. And so one seminar I attended, I remember, talked about what are they trying to communicate? What are they trying to control? What are they trying to avoid? And so when you start thinking about people who are attempting death by suicide, are they trying to communicate something to their parents, to their teachers, to their, friends, to their family? Is there something that they feel like they've been trying to say and they can't say it? And so this is kind of a last ditch effort to get everyone's attention. So that's where I think it's important for us to be in communication with people. And we'll talk about a little bit, some of the things to look for, but just mainly if things don't seem right, communicate with someone, talk to them. Sometimes it's about control. Maybe manipulation could be thrown in there. I'm sure that there's times when there's someone trying to manipulate something, but most of the time that's going to be more along the lines of they're trying to control something where they feel like life is really spiraling and they have no control over anything in their life. And so here they are. Okay, the one thing I can control is whether I live or die. Maybe they've been in an abusive situation. That could also be the case with communicate, that they're dealing with some abuse, they're dealing with some, situation that's happening in their life, and they feel like they have no control and they feel like no one's listening. And so here's my way of getting that said and getting that attention. And then, sometimes that comes along with the fact that they might have something that they've done that they're trying to avoid trouble or consequences or, something along that line. And so people believe kind of in that moment that, okay, the only answer to this is just to take my life. And it's not that, we generally, our first thing is to survive. Like, I want to live before anything else. You go start trying to drown someone or, do anything like that, you're going to quickly realize we have the fight to live. So if somebody has come to the conclusion that they're going to attempt suicide, they have had to override all of those tendencies. And so it's a pretty powerful emotion. So it's important, I think, first to understand what is it that maybe they're trying to communicate. What is it that they're trying to avoid? What is it that they're trying to control? Is there something in there that I can help with? Is there something in there that I can talk with them with? To know that they're not alone, because I think most of the time that's what the feeling is that I'm alone. Maybe I've got all kinds of people around me, but I don't feel like they're going to understand it. I don't feel like they're going to want to help me with it, or that they're going to be mad at me, or they're going to whatever. So that's why I think it's really important with teenagers, adults to teenagers, and adults with each other. We need people we can talk to and to know that we can turn to them in those moments.
Yeah. I mean, like I said, this week has been a wild week. And just having people that I can text and go, man, it's been a wild week, is just a huge release. Of course, with the legendary text group has been shared and talked about on the podcast a lot. And I'm sure most people listening have people like that. But if you don't, I can't amen Ben enough. Find some people, right? Reach out. You can reach out to us at hello@benandtravis.com if nothing else. Of course, the hotline below, and I'm sure there are other hotlines that you can reach out to just to have someone to talk to. But find somebody. And of course, we are Christians. We believe in the power of prayer. We believe in Scripture. People ask me, well, what do I do if I have doubts? And I say the tendency is we want to move away from God. And really, if we have doubts, we should lean into God. James tells us in chapter 4 and verse 8, draw near to God and he will draw near to you. And so we obviously want you, if you're listening to this or watching this and you're questioning your existence, understand that you have a God-given purpose and a value that is not attached to any of the good or the bad that you do. God has given you a purpose, a value, and he's prepared good works for you to do. And so if nothing else, he sees something in you. And of course we do as well. We see you as made in the image of God. And so, Ben, what are some things, some tips, some things to look for? I think obviously we live in an age when people, if they tell you something, even if it's shocking, you should take that as legit, right? I mean, school, you can't say some of the things at school like we would have said because, it's sensitive things. You can't say those things. People take you seriously. I'd say the same thing in this era, right? Someone says something, even if it's as bold as to say, I'm contemplating taking my own life, you have to conduct yourself as though that is a real threat.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing you said a while ago is, or one thing you say often that kind of goes with what you were saying is, God can redeem us. And so, from a lot of things and has redeemed us, but we can be forgiven. The things that maybe you're contemplating when you are thinking, okay, I've got to avoid something. There are people who love you out there who will help you, and God is one of them. So, don't run away from that. Run to it. But things to kind of be looking for and considering. Of course, if somebody just comes right out and says it, that doesn't always happen. But when they do say something, or when you think something, don't hesitate to ask them, and don't beat around the bush. Are you thinking about hurting yourself? Because some people don't think of suicide as hurting themselves. They're ending it. The hurt's gone at that point. And so if you say hurting yourself, they go, no, I don't want to hurt myself. But they're wanting to end the pain. And so that's, they see that as two different things sometimes. So be very blunt and point blank. If you think that is being contemplated, then just come out and say it. Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you considering suicide? And being very blunt about it is okay, because in that moment, then you can get that answer. But when some of the things to be looking for, if they're talking about death a lot, if they're sharing things about death quite often, if that's just a topic that keeps coming up, it might be something to just talk to them straight and see, where that's coming from. Self-harm in and of itself is not suicidal tendencies. People cut without the intention of committing suicide. People, burn or whatever themselves without the intention of suicide. However, it is something to be considered, because they're struggling. If they're doing those things, they're struggling with how to deal with pain, how to deal with things they don't know how to handle. And so it can be one of those precursors to, it can be something that, if they don't learn how to deal with that pain, it could lead. So that's one of those early signs to go, hey, let's get them talking to somebody. Let's get them sharing some things, because they need to communicate something, because most of the time self-harm is linked to not being able to cope well with stress or other things that are around them. Look for helpless and hopeless feelings being shared. Things are never going to get better. I'm always going to be in this, just kind of that hopeless spiral of things. Of course, depression along with that. If there's depression, always, being aware of it, because that can come on. That sometimes that's through no fault. I mean, depression is not always the fault of the person. Very rarely is it. You have people who have postpartum depression as a result of pregnancies. You have people who have chemical things that are going on that create depression. You have situational stuff like losses and death that, they don't know how to manage that or are struggling to manage it. And so there's a lot of different causes to depression, but depression is certainly one of the things to be aware of, and just that emotional pain. And whether it's because of grief or it's because of something else, because of abuse or because of something that's happened in their life, or just because of the chemicals not being exactly right in the brain, that emotional pain won't go away. And they kind of talk about that. Those are just some things to be aware of, because there are medicines that will help. There are medicines that people can take. There's therapists, counselors, people that they can contact. There's the 988 number that can be contacted. And so there are people who are willing to help try to alleviate that emotional pain. But it needs to be talked about so that can happen. And then maybe the last thing would just be, are there any changes, in the way that they're behaving? Withdrawal from the things that they have always loved or the people that they've always loved to be around. Are they worried, on edge, unusually angry, fidgety, or restless, inconsolable? Sleeping or eating more or less, just changes that you're just like, something's different, and they just don't seem like themselves. Just do what you can to sort of communicate with them. Find out if that comes up, then you get them some help. If someone brings that up to me, I don't let them go home without letting someone know. I either take them to the hospital or I get someone in their family to take them to the hospital, but it needs to be dealt with. And just because, like you said, we don't want to mess with it in today's world. We know better than to just leave it alone.
Yeah. And we, as we've said, we believe in the full counsel of God to use all the things he created at our disposal, whether that's a medical approach, scripture, prayer, talking to someone who's been trained in the mental health profession, but talk to someone. And I think you mentioned some of the lies that we kind of sell ourselves, right? I believe that Satan exists, and that name just means the accuser. And I can remember very early on in my leukemia treatment thinking this will always be the case. Like, this will always be here. And, now I'm coming up on 5 years and a couple of years from a treatment, but in my mind, I was tired. And that may lead into some other points you want to make, but like, I was tired and it was a struggle. And like, I just didn't have the mental capacity to think past 15 minutes. And I kind of made that deal with the Lord and those around me. We'll make it through the next 15 minutes and then we'll talk again. And I wouldn't say that I was suicidal by any means, but I do know what it feels like to have that mental block of, I can't think past the next 15 minutes. And sometimes that's the case. And I think that's part of what you're talking about, going home with somebody or going to the hospital, not being alone. And I think that's such a huge key to a lot of the church and a lot of the fellowship and what we're doing here on this podcast to help people realize you're not alone. We all struggle together. And I think that a lot of times those that are opposed to us hate that together part and come up with reasons to withdraw.
Well, and we've talked about before, a lot of times with anxiety, it's about what's in the past or what's in the future and not about what's going on in the moment. And so much of that is true here too, because what I'm trying to communicate might be something that was in the past. What I might be trying to control or avoid are things that are going to happen in the future if I don't get this handled some way. And so I'm focusing so many times on those things, and talked to some kids this week just about, like a file folder. Does this go in the file for today, for the moment? Or does this go in the file for tomorrow? Does this go in the file for, things that have happened in the past? Because the only file that I can really do anything about right now is the one right here in front of me, the one today. And so if it's for tomorrow, let's stick it over there. If you're worried about consequences that are going to happen tomorrow, stick it over there in tomorrow's file, and let's talk about what your emotions and what you're struggling with today are. And so, getting it in the proper place. And you've probably heard the acronym PLAID PALS. And, if we're assessing, or, police officers or others are assessing the suicidality of people, do they have a plan? Is the P? What's the lethality of the plan? Somebody says, I'm gonna, use something that just doesn't seem like it would make any sense. Then maybe, they don't have full intention. But if somebody says a gun, I'm gonna hang myself, I'm gonna jump off a bridge, those are all pretty lethal plans. Availability to those things. I'm going to jump out of a plane. Well, I might not be in a plane. I may not have access to a plane. I'm certainly not going to let you on a plane if that's the case. But, the availability to it, is there an illness, or has there been an illness for them? Do they have one like you were talking about with leukemia or something like that? Has there been depression, previous attempts? Alone? Are they kind of a loner? They don't have people around them, support groups? Has there been a significant loss, a death, a job, relationships, and is there substance abuse? So if you've got those PLAID PALS is an acronym, those are just some of the things that it kind of in the same list, that similar things that were in the list I mentioned earlier, just to be looking for. These are things that if they're present, you might go, hey, they're high risk. Let's see what we can do about helping them before it gets to that point. Because I mentioned some statistics earlier. The only other one I'll mention is teens and young adults. There's a teen or a young adult dies every hour and a half by suicide. By time frame, you think about that. Every hour and a half, a young person is taking their life. So it's a significant thing that we need to be concerned about.
Well, people that have been left behind after these circumstances, there's a phrase, that is used quite a bit, and it all kind of leads to the idea of whatever it was, we would much rather have cried with you through it, struggled, argued about it, been able to hug you through it, walk you through it, than to have this outcome. Mm-hmm. And so whatever you may be in as you listen to this, whatever circumstance, understand that there are people who love you. And sometimes as a parent, I just try to communicate even to my kids at their age, hey, there's nothing that at the end of the day you can't bring to me and let's talk about it, right? Like I may be disappointed, it may be shocking, but I'd rather us have that conversation and work through it than for you to feel like you have to bury it and hold it back.
And if you're wanting the pain to subside, and that's the desire many times, the pain's not going away. The pain's being transferred, and it's someone else is going to have the pain as a result of that action, because somebody else is going to mourn. You may feel like nobody cares, but there are people who care, and there's people who will mourn that loss. There's been deaths this week in the community, or in Alabama, that have broken my heart to hear about, and I didn't know the people, but it still is difficult to get that news or to hear those things. So there are people who care. There are people that you can reach out to, and so don't hesitate to do that if you happen to find yourself there. If you're someone who's concerned about someone, you have questions about that, there's all kinds of information online. We can be a tool or a resource. There's other counseling agencies all over the United States, but find people who can help you.
Well, Ben, I appreciate all the thoughts you had today and sharing that. And I know somebody will benefit from that. And once again, I'll just reiterate what you said. We love you and we care about you, and we serve a big enough God to handle whatever it is you're dealing with. And we could get into the weeds about what God feels about it. And I know some people have different opinions on that. But we do know, I think we can all agree that God loves you. He has a purpose for your life. He has some good works prepared for you to still do. And so when it's time to go home to him, he'll make that decision. And I look forward to that time, but we have a lot of things to accomplish here. And so if nothing else, know that you're loved, you have a purpose. And if there's any way that we can assist you, I know Ben there in Muscle Shoals, Pam Lenz and Karen Mann work with him, and they're all great people, some good friends. I'm sure you can reach out to them and they would assist you in any way that they can, but do reach out to someone. And so, Ben, I appreciate your time, and we'll talk at everybody again next week.
Thanks for being with us for this episode of the Helping Healing Humor podcast. Be sure to download our free ebook, 28 Days of Focused Living, at benandtravis.com and receive all of our Helping Healing and Humor extra content directly in your inbox. We look forward to having you join us at the same Ben and Travis time, same Ben and Travis channel.